there. I mean, there's yoga calm now that's getting into a lot of schools. There's a Mind Up curriculum that's getting into schools. There's the incredible 5-point scale that some of you may have seen. There's lots of sensory diet and sensory-based coping strategies, zones of regulation. I don't know if any of these sound familiar, but these are all technologies that are getting into schools to start to teach coping. They are so important. But the number one piece about coping skills is it needs to be a practice, even for us. If you're not practicing something to help regulate your emotions and your stress, then I promise you you're not regulating your emotions and your stress. It has to be a practice, something that you're practicing even when you're not, and especially when you're not stressed. And for our students, that's the biggest piece of handling this low frustration tolerance, is to have a daily, maybe even an hourly practice. I had one guy, he was so significantly disrupted by any transition in his day that he would just come unglued and he was in high school by the time I started working with him. He was 6 feet tall. He wasn't very motorically coordinated, but he could land a blow if he needed to, And so he would start, from the time the bells would ring or other people would start to move around, he would get so dysregulated, and the behaviors would just grow out of that dysregulation because of the transition. And so we started to work with him, and first we worked with him in a small room, but before every transition, his staff would review. He had a social story that talked about when I'm safe, that I'm calm and happy and with other people. When I'm unsafe, my actions are too big, my voice is too much, I need to take some space, and we called it in the blue because he had this little corner with a blue mat and a blue light, and it was the blue. I will take some space in the blue and get back to safe. And so for every transition, we'd review this, and we'd do a breathing practice, and about every third transition, we'd go over to the blue, and we'd sit down, and we'd do a breathing and a calming. So most of his days were spent just practicing regulating until he could. And the last time I saw him, I'm actually going to get to see him this fall. He's transitioning, to his transition program out of high school. But when I saw him in the spring, so many moments just make me want to tear up. This was Farmington High School. So you can imagine the number of kids in Farmington High School. He was in the cafeteria, he's in this gigantic room where they serve food to like 1,000 kids at a time. He was sitting at a big round table with a bunch of his peers and some staff, and all of a sudden I saw him, they have his little social story now on just a laminated card, that you can wear, and I saw him reach over and turn it to unsafe, go get up around his parrot, take a chair, pull it off to the side, just away from the table, and sit there and, here's a guy, IQ, like age 3 or 4, right? We always see that, like, their IQ is so low, He totally gets it. When he starts to feel himself getting stressed out, he pulls himself away a little bit and starts to do his breathing. He's learned to cope. So absolutely we can address it, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of practice. And it's not just something that we say, okay, take a deep breath, relax. Which, by the way, when I'm stressed, do not tell me to relax. I do not like that. I also learned not to coach, especially young people or people with some language differences, to take a deep breath because you get this. Okay, take a long, slow breath. Let's go for long and slow, because deep just seems to be way too much shoulder action. So, behavioral rigidity also sometimes, I think, for more of our thinkers, it could be more cognitive flexibility. So maybe it's not that my behaviors are very rigid, but my thoughts, like I'm really stuck in this thought. My idea is the only way, kind of thing. So it could be either. But that really ties into that receptive skill deficit, okay? The more that I've struggled to use language to know what to expect, the more I want things to be exactly the same every day, moment to moment. So you think about some of the profiles of kids that are the most rigid, often kids on the autism spectrum. And what do we know about people with autism? Language is really tough for them. They are not language-based learners, they are visual learners. So the way they have predictability in the world, have it the same all the time. And again, predictability is how we feel in control. It's an illusion, but we feel in control. So if I don't have the predictability, then I need the same, the same, the same. And the way I think it is the way it is, right? And then there's the social skill deficits. And, especially at school, it's a social world, people coming and going. I had this guy, we just got to do an assessment for him in school this summer, which is not my favorite to do an assessment during summer school, because of course summer school is not at all like school, but okay, we did the assessment for him this summer. One of his big triggers is excuse me. If anyone uses the phrase excuse me, he's likely to blow. Which is kind of tough, because people use excuse me all the time and don't even know. And so he tries to tell all of his teachers, and he's junior high, trying to tell everybody, like, please don't say excuse me. And that's kind of the way they tried to address this at school till now, is to just try to get everybody around and not to say excuse me. Well, I'll try, but I might just say it anyway. But I figured out in the course of this assessment where I think my hypothesis about where this came from. When he was in 4th grade, he had a shared desk. And so intermittently and unpredictably throughout the day, another student or two would show up and just kind of swoop into his desk, his space, to grab something and say, excuse me, I just need to get my book, excuse me, I'm going to grab my coat, excuse me, I need it, excuse me. And by the end of that year, excuse me is now associated with a huge lack of social predictability. Like this whole social, like when is somebody going to come and talk to me, when are they going to get in my space? And because he didn't have the social skills to sort of manage that and to communicate about that and to work that out in any other way, he has just like dumped it all into this word excuse me. And excuse me is just like the most offensive thing now. Because to him it indicates someone getting too close, getting in his space, right? So social skills are huge to be able to manage that, to communicate. I mean, that links right back into communication skills. Can I talk to you about it? Do I know what else to do about it? How to problem solve it? Do I know how to get people to predictably interact with me and to terminate predictably people interacting with me? These are social skills. Anybody ever go through a phase maybe in junior high where you hang up on people on the phone? It's over, like, I don't know how to get out of this situation, right? And so, for kids that we work with that struggle with those kinds of social skills, behavior can get you away from me in a minute. Behavior can also get you to me in a minute. So depending on which tools I use, right? I can gain interaction, I can terminate interaction with my behavior. And then we have the things that are going on sort of, neurotransmitter-wise, and then our whole physiology relative to that, our brain chemistry. So we have what's called the mental health status. And, one thing I always like to note in a training like this, I think it's one of the most important variables of working with kids that have any sort of mental health diagnoses or characteristic, that status will wax and wane. So there are better days and there are worse days, or better periods and worse periods. And we don't necessarily have any control over that, nor can we often change that. Because the things that it requires to change that, we have, no bearing on medications, therapies, other kinds of things like that may be necessary. So a couple of things I think about. One that I always like to mention is, oh, by the way, autism has a similar profile. It will wax and wane. And so if you've gotten to know a person well, a person that has autism, if you parent a child with autism, or if you've worked a lot with people with autism, you'll see this. It's almost like, and not to be, I want to be person-specific, but it's easier to say, or person-centered, but it's easier to say it this way. It's as if some days they are more autistic, and then some days they are less, right? So some days those characteristics of autism are just, oh my gosh, I can't seem to reach you at all. You're just all sensory. You're no social. And then other days it's like, oh my gosh, clarity. The cloud sort of moved away, and there's a real connection here, and I feel you present and connecting with me, maybe with language even, or in other ways. So all of our mental health Status will tend to do that, although what the pattern will be, we don't always know. We're sort of watching to see it unfold. One of the things that I will say quite often, both with the mental and the physical health status, when you're supporting a student that has some of these struggles, you need to support the student where they are today. We get really caught up in our mind about what I know you can do. And then I want you to perform there. And then, we sort of expect this, right? This is progress, right? But at the end of the day, this is progress too. Right? Because we're starting here and we're ending here. But I tell you what, when I was right here, it sure didn't feel like progress. Right? This feels like a bad backsliding moment, even though, we still may be making progress. So I will write behavior plans with what I call an alternate day schedule or an alternate day plan. And that's a plan for when your mental health or your physical health symptoms are the prominent feature today. And so what we really need to work on today is coping or comfort. Now, and I really am relating to this one right now because this summer has been a really hard summer for me. I have had a physical health thing that has just, they've struggled to get it diagnosed. I'm on week 9. And it's a lot of pain and discomfort associated with this condition. And I had like about 5 failed treatments. And each time, because of the waxing and waning status of this condition, I thought I was getting better. And then I wasn't. And then I thought I was, and then I wasn't. And man, it takes a toll. And things that I can do really, really well, like return a phone call or send an email, for the last 9 weeks I have struggled to do these things. Right? So I get it. It's like where I'm at now and my best today looks really different than hopefully a month from now when I'm really on the mend. Because once again, they sold me on potential diagnosis and treatment, and my God, I'm getting better. It's going to work this time. So we need to remember that some of these variables impacting behavior, we're not going to be able to get right in there and change. And some of the resulting behavior, we have to figure out how to put some supports around that. And to just stand in this place, if it's not okay, you can't do that, is going to be suffering for me and for you. Because you are doing that, and there's a reason. You can even think about it on a bad cold day. What's your performance like when you have a bad cold versus when you don't? I mean, it's hard to maintain that consistent performance with that kind of a variable. And then we get into the neurological functioning beyond just the neurotransmitters of our mental health. We can get into the executive functioning pieces are huge. Now, executive functioning, that's this, you hear that a lot now. It's kind of a buzzword, but it is a big deal. It's the last part of our brain to develop. It's not fully developed until 23 to 25, which I smile about that because here's what it's responsible for. Impulse control, emotional regulation, planning and organizing and goal setting and achieving, learning from past mistakes to correct future behavior. It's all executive. This is why kids in general are a handful, right? Because they're not little adults at all. I mean, without executive functioning, the world is kind of easy. I could be really hard though, right? So executive functioning, and if we get it, if our brain is fully myelinated, the executive function, the prefrontal cortex, at 23 to 25, I always figure, well, so that's when you have full access to it. When do you master it? I'm 45. I'm getting close. Still a little impulsive, right? Still struggle with it. So and then when you think about that, impulse control, emotional regulation, making mistakes over and over. Think about the kids you work with. You're like, yeah, they're impulsive. Oh, yeah, they're really emotional. Oh, yeah, they make the same mistakes over and over. They're not intrinsically motivated. This morning, somebody that asked that question is really good. It's like, well, when do we move from like a token economy to you being motivated internally to do that? We don't always want to depend on. But my answer to that is depending on this executive functioning deficit. I mean, if it's a lifelong deficit, you may not ever get to intrinsic motivation. You need executive functioning, because that's that goal setting and achieving part. And if I have no construct for that, then how would I be internally motivated to do your math? not going to happen, and it's not a fault of because you use too many reinforcers with me. And some folks, for the rest of their life, are going to need that external motivation to continue to achieve to the next and the next level. And that's just the reality of executive functioning deficit. Now, some kids, it's more of a delay, right? So they're getting there, just a lot slower. And with all kids, it's certainly about development, right? Because when I think of executive functioning, I think wise mind, I think rational, I think mature, right? So we know kids, not always so mature, not always so rational, not always so wise in general. And I think even like 20-year-olds. We're kind of getting that idea now that parenting does not stop at 18, or at 20, or at 25, and it probably should. If you have, if your internal supervisor is still just developing, probably not a good time for mom to be like, right? And you think, even, think of your own life. Like, when did you make those really big mistakes and go, oh, yeah. It's probably more like 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. For males, oftentimes, it does tend to be slower developing in males. That's the research. That's not me. The woman saying that. Yeah?
Do you have questions, or should I ask you after?
Go right ahead.
I'm thinking in my head of kids that I think are intrinsically motivated. Is that just, am I just fooling myself then? Or is it because they are getting attention from their parents for their behavior? But it's not coming from them? Is that what you mean?
So, but they certainly could be. Absolutely, some kids are intrinsically motivated. Absolutely. And even kids that have some developmental differences or cognitive differences can still be very intrinsically motivated. I've worked with kids that have, for whatever reason, although they might have, a whole mess of other things going on that are struggles, their executive functioning is actually quite well intact, right? Or yes, because these motivators come from a lot of different places. And so depending, if your family has worked a lot on value, and you're really attached to your family, and so pleasing them matters, right? So then that becomes an internal motivator, even though it may not be about achieving, but it's about this value of what my family says they want to see in me. So I'm motivated to please them, and therefore I do try really hard in my work. So yeah, it's not to say that a lot of kids absolutely are, but some kids will never, just aren't. And I think what I see is, we get entrenched sometimes in sort of our belief systems. And one of them is, we can't just keep feeding them these rewards for their whole life. At some point they have to become intrinsically motivated. And I'm just saying there absolutely are kids that's not going to happen, and it's not fair to put that on them. Because what we're asking for is a brain change. And they can't do that. So, but absolutely, if it's there, then we work with that. And we try. And part of how I do work with it is rather than going at the goal and the achieving piece, I really try to work on values. So what does matter to you? And if I can get at what matters to you, then we can start to work with that as a way to motivate you more and more from the inside. Because something matters to you, but it's a value rather than a goal. And then the language processing differences or difficulties. Again, you have delayed processing, you have disorganized processing. I just think back to my days sitting in physics class. And I'm like, what language are you speaking? And why do none of these sentences compute? I cannot make them make sense. I never could. The language of physics is like Spanish to me. It just makes no sense. Well, actually, I understand Spanish more than physics, quite frankly. French. It's like French to me. I don't get it at all. And so that's what I imagine for some of the kids that I work with, that all of the verbal inputs and the language inputs coming in. It's like, it's going to take me time, and I have to sit with it. I sat with a gal last 2 weeks ago, and she is actually, I think, cognitively she tests average, but she's a very delayed processor. And having a conversation with her was so interesting, because I would sort of put something out there, and I could time it, and it literally would be about 2 minutes, and then she'd ask a follow-up clarifying question. So for that entire time, she was processing what I had asked of her. And I could see how, like, especially in a school setting, she's fallen through cracks because 2 minutes, is a really long time. We have moved on, possibly finished that entire thing up and moved on to something completely different, and yet she's still back there on that first question. And she'll get there, and she'll get there really well, and she's insightful, and she's actually quite brilliant. But it's not, without the right kinds of supports, it's not going to show up in school. And she's going to get passed right over. And then the medication, that kind of goes along with the mental health piece. And from our perspective, I mean, this is one of those variables that we have really no control over, and yet it's very powerful sometimes. Like, you ever had a kid come to school, attention deficit disordered, and didn't take their meds today? And what's that look like? That is tough, right? And that's, again, where sometimes I start thinking about an alternate day schedule, or maybe we need a behavior plan that has a backup med at school. But if we absolutely can't do that, then maybe we need a behavior plan that says, here's how we operate on a no med day. And we're not trying to do focused, concentrated activities. We're embedding learning into moving. So I let you move, and then I throw some of your mastered material at you so that you can continue to keep that material mastered, help regulate your body, and pray to God you get your med tomorrow, right? And then we'll start back on skill acquisition. And then, that, kind of in line with the sensory integration status, holy buckets. And I think I was talking this morning about, more and more becoming aware of people that have different sensory processing profiles, and the degree to which, like STEM, the obvious STEM, the flapping, the rocking, the shaking, the twirling, right? I get all that, I see it. But more and more I've started to tune into the STEM of visual. The people who just notice the contrast in the lines, the light and the dark. And this is all I have to do. STEM and STEM and STEM. And just look around the room, right? And be so disengaged with everything that's going on, but so engaged in what I'm doing. And, can look like non-compliance, can look like shutdown, can look like a lot of things. And then I try a timeout again. You're going to take those eyes with you, and there's going to be lines and contrast everywhere you go, right? One of the points I will make about the sensory integration piece is to think about, right now in this moment, our brain is receiving billions, literally billions of bits of sensory information, and we're processing a few thousand, because that's all we need. That's a well-integrated brain. So through your skin, through your joints, through your muscles, through your eyes, and your ears, and your nose, and your mouth, through your skin, you're getting billions of pieces of sensory information into your brain. Your brain is like, okay, don't need, use, don't need, use, don't need, use. Right? So tune in to your clothes. You can actually feel everywhere that your clothes touch your skin. But imagine if you had to feel that all day long. Now let's talk about the function of disrobing. Right? I mean, some of us ladies that have to wear the undergarments with a little of wires, what do you put wires in my clothes for? We can start to feel that even by 3 o'clock. You're like, I am so getting out of this as soon as I get home, or my waistband got a little tight, or my shoes, like my feet swell up, and now my shoes, I'm getting out of these as soon as I can, right? Because you can't, all of a sudden, you can't get rid of that input anymore. It's become too much. And so you just want to get rid of the feeling. And that's the experience of a lot of kiddos all day long. It's either all coming in and they can't regulate it, or it's none of it's coming in. And they're looking for something. Or some combination. I get lots of proprioceptive and tactile, I get almost no auditory. So that particular variable can be really huge, and I have to say some of the hardest behaviors that I've ever had to work with and try to support change around are those that have primarily a sensory function, meaning that what I get or what I avoid is all internal, and it happens at the moment that I take the action. So I talked about one young man I worked with. He didn't like to be squeezed. I know a lot of kids who like to be squeezed. He liked to squeeze. And he particularly liked to squeeze arms like these. Nice fleshy, flabby, squeezy arms. And this is after a couple years of serious weight training, so it takes a long time to get rid of that flab. And so he would target, and especially women in the summer when you start going sleeveless, he'd like, and he'd come up and he would squeeze so hard that he would leave finger bruises. And if he was really loving your arm, he'd get his chin in the action, extra pressure in there. And so you can imagine, like, we go out to Cub Foods, and this lady has some nice pair of arms on her, and all of a sudden she's like, this kid's assaulting me! Because even by 4th grade, he was a baby. He's now like 6'3", 300 pounds as an adult, but at the time, so he was a big boy. And he'd come up and grab your bare arm, and you're like, call 911. So we tried everything, and this mother, she was not afraid to go there to try to find replacements, okay? So we're thinking skin and squishy and whatever, so she was even on the adult, sites ordering skin-like things. But she, she was trying, right? We're going to replace this, you're going to find something else that he would accept. And this is where I would tell you, one of the things I've learned, there is nothing that feels like the human body. If you have somebody that they get a lot of their input from another person, you're going to have a hard time replacing that. Because I've tried every material out there. Even the synthetic skins, right? It's not the same. You don't get the same feedback. And so we're like, what are we going to do about this? Because we're about at the point where he can't go anywhere. He's hurting people everywhere we go. So believe it or not, the intervention was communication. When we taught him to approach someone and ask. Now, we had to work on that, so we came up with squeeze, please. He's very limited in his, in the words he would use, so we had to come up with something he would say. And for weeks, months, every time he approached any one of us, no matter whether if we even thought, unless we knew he was very much doing something else, we would stop him and assume he probably wanted this, and we all wore bare arms just to taunt him to want to come squeeze our arms. And he would come and you'd immediately block, say, squeeze, please, squeeze, please, and then you'd allow it. And immediately block, and then you'd allow it. Now, one of the nice things about just doing that was you got to meet, so he didn't come out of the blue and sort of get you. And this way you mediated a little bit, so you could help with the pressure. That was nice. I still allowed him to squeeze me really hard because I wanted him to be rewarded for saying squeeze. Once we had him 100% of the time, unprompted trials, right, so we didn't have to stop him, we didn't have to do anything, he was just coming up, squeeze, please, squeeze, please, squeeze, please. Then 1 out of every 4 times we'd say no. And then 1 out of every, and then it was 2 out of 4, and then 3 out of 4, and that's where we ended it. 3 out of every 4 times we'd tell him no. So we, slowly faded that out so he would accept it, because he knew he was going to have another chance. And we ended up with an intervention that worked really well. It was just slightly awkward at Cub now, is all, because he'd walk up to a strange lady and say, squeeze, please. Which doesn't immediately get you calling 911, but you're definitely looking around for who's the adult in charge. But what was really nice about that is even if the adult in charge was 2 steps away, just tell him no. No. And he would accept it. So, he's still fully, again, now he's 6'3", and 300 pounds, he's fully integrated in the community. He does all right. And again, I'm not even sure he still does the arm squeezing, especially not with strangers. He's continued to develop his social skills, and so it's mattering more and more how other people perceive him, which is great. And then in terms of those variables that are social, these are our triggers. You see these day after day as that trigger point. That's the antecedent, right? So task demands. It could be, really though, any request. For some kids, it could be stand up, put on your shoes, line up at the door, turn off the lights. It could be, for some kids that are really avoidant, like anything we instruct them to do is a potential trigger point for a power struggle, a meltdown, something. For other kids, it's very specific task requests. Do your math, right? Time to work, right? It's just those ones that are specific to the thing they don't like. And then that's the trigger. Or it could be that it could be that it's time for math, and so they come very fine to the desk, and then you put the math in front of them, and that's the trigger, right? Like, okay, I could talk about it, but once I actually have to do it. So it might be when the materials actually show up. And again, that could be indicative of this receptive, like, oh, everybody's moving to the desk, that's great, I'll move to the desk. I didn't really get that it's math time until, oh, it's math time. No, thank you. And then the other, so that's all the escape motivated stuff, but the attention behaviors are all about you're there. That somebody else is there. I will engage in the behavior to try to get a response from you. So we become a variable. We can't help it. We have to be there. And those of you who have been doing this job long enough know that while you come to solve problems, you actually create some too, because you're there. So you become almost like a pawn on this kid's chessboard, and he's going to see where he can move you with his behavior. The lack of adequate structure and predictability kind of gets back to the degree to which a lot of the kids we're working with need a high level of predictability. And so this is where visual strategies, I cannot emphasize it enough. It's not about kids with autism. It's about kids. I've got a 5-year-old. When he was 2, I started a duration map with him driving grandmas, because grandmas is 2.5 hours from Minneapolis to Truman. And you know what a 2-year-old and a 2.5-year-old says the whole time. So I made this little piece of construction paper, and I listed Jordan, Belle Plaine, Seward, St. Peter, Mankato, Lake Crystal, Medelia, and then Grandma's Highway, that's what we call it, getting 1 to 15, Louisville, and you fold it down. So for every town you go by, and so the paper would get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. So about the time you couldn't stand it anymore, it was time to fold down another town, and fold down another town, and fold down another town. Because it gave him adequate predictability to know when we're going to get there. Because what does 2 hours mean to a 2.5 hours? Nothing, right? It might as well be 10 more minutes, right? It means nothing. We'll get there when we get there. Try that one. It doesn't help, right? But this helped. He didn't ask. He just looked for his piece of paper. He looked at it. He pulled down the next town. He pulled down the next. About the time again when we couldn't stand it, we're folding down another. So visual predictability is so huge. And it's not just about being on the spectrum. And it doesn't have to be picture symbols. Even with my 2.5-year-old, I didn't make pictures of the towns. He didn't need to read them. He just needed to see that this list of places is getting shorter and shorter until we get there. It was visual, right? So a lot of times, even with kids who are maybe just barely sight readers, I'll still use word lists, because if you sight read enough, you're going to figure out, and if I'm associating this word to this thing, you're a visual learner. This is going to make a lot more sense to you, even if you're not a reader. And one of the ways I will just read, because so many times when I need structure for a kid, I get out a piece of paper and a pencil and I start drawing. And I just draw out the next, couple of activities so you know what's going to happen. And then people go, oh, Wendy, I can't draw. Well, you cannot draw. But it doesn't matter. And if you look at the very first picture symbol systems they used for adults with developmental disabilities way back in the 30s and 40s when they were first developing these technologies, they didn't even use picture icons. They used, it was like Morse code in pictures. It was dots and dashes and squiggles. But they could get people with severe and profound developmental cognitive delay to associate this dot and squiggle means lunch. And this line and dot means go outside. Visual learners. You don't need an exact representation. A lot of times you just need to have a representation visually. Denial, I do not like to be told no and I can't have my way. Nobody does. But the reason why this becomes a bigger trigger, we know we can see that one coming. I mean, you probably start to get a stomach ache sometimes and you know you have to deny a kid, right? It's like, oh God, we're gonna have to tell him no. So those are obvious, but really, this becomes a trigger a lot more often because of that lack of predictability. So they think X is gonna happen, but really it's gonna be Y, right? Oh, we're walking past the gym, must be gym time. Oh wait, now the gym is way back there and I'm heading into a music room. Meltdown. But you like music. But I thought I was going to gym. But it's a B day. We always go to music on B day. We went over the schedule this morning back in class and we said it was music, remember? No. Not only that, but as I walked past the gym, I thought we were going in there, right? And this, I can't tell you how many times, when I hear staff say to me, well, the behavior happens out of the blue, I start looking for a lack of predictability. Because that's going to show up as denial. And that out of the blue to you felt like denial to that kid. You didn't see it coming. But that didn't mean that there weren't predictors there. The other place I look for out of the blue is internal, by the way. Because I promise you, no behavior is actually out of the blue. So it could be something internal, a status change inside, but many times I look for they weren't expecting that, and so when that happened, and you didn't know they weren't expecting that, so it seemed out of the blue to you. A lack of active engagement, which is different than you don't have anything to do. I have yet to see a kid in school who wasn't given something to do. You guys are really, really awesome about providing things for kids to do. What I see all the time is the kids aren't actually doing that. And so then they get busy with something else. And often that's you and the other students in the room. And it can become a really big problem. And I told this story this morning. I'll tell you guys that this was a junior high school kid. I met him a few years ago. He's a sweet kid. He's on the spectrum. He's a musical savant. He plays a saxophone. And it's just brilliant. He's always first chair. He's amazing. But when I met him, he was in a kind of a resource-based classroom, ASC classroom. And they were struggling. And what he would do, day after day, he'd get in the hammock swing, get all cozy in his hammock swing. And every other kid in the class, he would just say one or two things to him, set him off. Set him off, set him off, set him off, until he had every other kid just going nuts. And then he'd just smile and kick his head back and around. And I was hearing things like, you know, he's antisocial, he's just so cruel, he's so vindictive, you know, and they were trying to give him social feedback. So his teacher was telling him, you know, that's annoying. And I said, well, hold on. Would you do a little assessment for me? And she said, yeah. And I said, okay, I want you to do this. And then, so you have an Afghan? Is that an Afghan? Am I saying that right? I have a water bottle. Is what she said down there, right? You have an Afghan, I have a water bottle. And she said, what do you have? And he said, Afghan. And she said, what do I have? And he said, Afghan. And she said, no, what do I have? Afghan. No, Chuck, what do I have? I have an Afghan. And you have an Afghan. Yes, I have an Afghan. He's on first, right? But what this told me is he didn't have even basic perspective taking. There is no you there. There's only me here. And so, what was happening in this classroom was not him being cruel to a bunch of kids. It was him taking out his glitter box and throwing it in the air and sitting back in his swing and just watching the glitter as just the chaos ensued. And everybody, you know, because it was this kid running to the teacher and this kid's going over here crying and this kid's screaming and this kid's hitting the blackboard and this kid's cursing and he's just, right? Because there's no you in any of those kids. They're just objects that you can look. If you just tell that one he's a loser, he starts crying and running around the room. If you tell that one he's ugly, he'll go over and hit the blackboard. You know? Cause and effect. And he wasn't actively engaged. So he was choosing this activity over anything else. And it was a preferred activity. But I got his speech teacher to do some pretty intensive, it's almost like that discrete trial training they do with young kids with autism where you practice things. Well, there's a new methodology that's just come out in the last couple of years. And it's about teaching I, you, here, there, now, then. And you literally do it in this sort of rote back and forth practice, but sort of the final step of it is something like, you know, if I were you and you were me and here we're there and there we're here, now we're then and then we're now, what would you have? And so you got to go, okay, I'm you, so I have to at here, but I'm there, so but it's then, right? So you have to like keep flipping your mind until you arrive at the answer. And you start with, if I'm you and you're me, what do I have and what do you have, right? And then like, okay, today I was sitting in the green chair, tomorrow I'll be sitting in the red chair, today was tomorrow, right? So you just start flipping, I am you, here and there, and now and then. And by the time he had mastered that curriculum, his speech teacher said he was the leader of social skills class and the most pleasant boy to have in class. And I, as just an anecdotal data point, so this was a year and a half, 2 years ago. So in the spring of just this last year, was his last IEP meeting of the year, and I went to the high school. He's now in high school, and he came out of the office. I knew everybody was in the office meeting. He's such a handsome boy. He comes out of the office, and he goes across the hallway, and there's a girl sitting there. I could tell he didn't know her. And he walks up to her, he says, hi, my name is Dylan. My parents are having one of those boring IEP meetings. Do you mind if I sit here and talk with you? I'm going to cry. I mean, it was just like, wow. Talk about social skills, right? Because he had the opportunity to learn perspective, that there is a you there. It's kind of like the me and him. And it hurts, and it feels, and it experiences. And he doesn't do that to other kids anymore. He doesn't treat them like that at all. But it came out of initially this, like he wasn't busy doing what was available for him to do. So he got busy, and he used all the other kids as a really fun source of stiff. And then the punishment-induced counter-aggression, and again, this gets back to, you know, even when we're not intending punishment, and the place that I see this happen the most is if and when we do have to respond to crisis behavior, and we need to sort of approach, many times that feels like punishment, and it is the most escalating point, right, is as we approach. So I'm a big fan of know how you're going to approach, know when you're going to approach, and make that decision and do it. Because if you're kind of doing this dance, that is a high-risk time. If the kid is feeling punished, they will counter-aggress.